How Joe Biden stole the election.
Mr. Reagan.
Before we begin, I need to say that Facebook just completely demonetized my Mr. Reagan Facebook site. So if you're watching this on Facebook, I'm no longer going to be posting on here. You'll have to catch me on my YouTube channel. So please subscribe to me there on YouTube. You will find the link in the description. I also need to add a disclaimer to this video. What I'm going to say is not based on any hard evidence. This is all total speculation on my part based on the numerous red flags that I've read about in the past few weeks regarding the election. Okay, with that said, let's get into it. Obviously, many conservatives believe that the 2020 election was stolen from Donald Trump by the Democrats. I believe that without cheating, without the voter fraud, Donald Trump would have won the 2020 presidential election by a landslide. I have several videos coming out that will break down all of the red flags that indicate voter fraud, and there are a ton. So be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so that you can stay informed about all of that. So, how did the DNC do it? How did they steal the election? And why has it been so difficult to prove? Now, many of us hold out hope that Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell, Joe DeGeneva, Victoria Tunzing, Jenna Ellis, and all of the others behind the scenes looking into all of this, many of us hold out hope that these men and women will be able to uncover the hard evidence needed to show the massive systematic voter fraud that will allow the Supreme Court to nullify the results of the election and get Trump back into the White House for another 4 years. But that's the thing. I've been thinking about this, and it's possible there was no massive systematic voter fraud, and yet I still think the election was stolen. What do I mean? Well, we'll get into that in a moment. First, I want to explain how I think the DNC developed their strategy for stealing the 2020 general election, because if I'm right, this is critical. I believe the DNC not only stole the general election from Donald Trump, I believe they also stole the Democrat primary. I believe if we can figure out how they stole the primary, we can figure out how they stole the general. I'll break down all of this in one moment. First, I have to sell you something. Now, with so much uncertainty in the financial markets at the moment, you might be worried about what happens to your retirement plans. Well, Noble Gold has the answer. Start a qualifying gold IRA or 401k before the end of November, and Noble Gold is giving away an incredible solid 24-karat American Gold Eagle coin, and it's in a beautiful presentation box. With gold set to take off, there's never been a better time. It's like Black Friday all through November. So go to noblegoldinvestments.com and get this special coin offer, or call 877-646-5347. You may remember at the start of the 2020 Democrat primary, Biden's campaign was dead. He got just 15% of the vote in Iowa, and he got just 8% of the vote in New Hampshire. I mean, Biden was losing massively. The New York Times characterized Biden's comeback victory on Super Tuesday as a, quote, miracle.
Super Tuesday really delivered on the super, a real shocker and a political earthquake. These are the results nobody saw coming. Let's go straight to the map this morning. Joe Biden surging to victories in 9 states.
Super Tuesday living up to its billing tonight, resetting the Democratic race for president. Former Vice President Joe Biden making a remarkable political comeback from the brink.
Biggest night of the political year, and it was certainly a Super Tuesday for Joe Biden. No question about that. He rode a fast-breaking wave to score a primary comeback beyond any that has come before.
Well, this was just a remarkable upset that just a week ago no one saw coming.
The former vice president swept 10 out of 15 Super Tuesday contests, including upsets in Minnesota and even Texas.
They don't call Super Tuesday for nothing.
He also won 2 states in Bernie Sanders' backyard, Massachusetts and Maine.
Joe Biden won in states that he had never visited, where he spent very little money.
So you see, even the left-wing media was shocked by Biden's victory as the Democrat nominee. It's what you might call, if we're going to be cynical about it, a bit suspicious. Biden's meteoric rise to victory seemed at the time to be a great thing for Trump. Biden was, after all, a bumbling fool. He seemed like the last person Democrat voters would have chosen to represent them in the general election. And in fact, having spoken to many Democrat voters myself, I have never found one who actually voted for Joe Biden in the primary. In hindsight, the Biden win bears all the hallmarks of a manufactured victory. It seems to me to quite clearly have been rigged, but at the same time, nobody cared. It was just the Democrats. It didn't matter to us conservatives whether or not they'd rigged their own primaries. It simply seemed like a major misstep. It seemed like an egregious, unforced error. They'd chosen the absolute worst candidate to run against Donald Trump, and we couldn't have been happier about it. Little did we know that they were in fact plotting something far more sinister than anything we would dare imagine. But, you may ask, why would the DNC and the Democrat puppeteers behind the scenes want Joe Biden? There were many other better candidates. Well, it's because Biden is compromised. We now know that for a variety of reasons, China, Ukraine, Hunter's various scandals, that Joe Biden is a compromised man. The DNC almost certainly has 100% control over Joe Biden. I suspect that there is no decision that Joe Biden himself will actually make if he's allowed to move into the White House. Now, if the Democrats did rig the 2020 general election for Joe Biden, consider this. Consider the process of developing a technique to defraud a national election. In order to do this, the technique that you use to rig the election would have to fulfill two basic requirements. One, it would need to be effective. Two, it would need to be undetectable. In order to develop such a technique, many techniques would have to be developed and tested. Perhaps they develop 20, perhaps 50, perhaps 100. Who knows? But then, after you develop them, how do you test them? You need a trial, maybe several trials. What better testing ground than the Democrat primaries to work out all the bugs in your various programs? If you're going to do something like this, you'd have to expect that some of these efforts would fail, and some perhaps would fail catastrophically. And that's maybe what happened in Iowa. Now, you may remember that the 2020 Democrat caucus in Iowa was a massive disaster.
Questions swirling about what went wrong during Iowa's Democratic caucus.
We have worked with cybersecurity experts, nationally renowned cybersecurity experts, to test this app. We found a coding error last night once we discovered some irregularities as the results started to come in.
The Democrat Iowa caucus final result was delayed for ages because the app that was used to tabulate and report the results was faulty. But was it faulty? The app was created by a company called Shadow Incorporated.
That irregularity linked to this caucus app made by developer Shadow Inc., a for-profit development company based in Washington, D.C., describing itself as working to create a permanent advantage for progressive campaigns and causes through technology.
Now, if you thought Dominion sounded like the name of an evil organization straight out of an Ian Fleming novel, Shadow Incorporated has got to be the villain from the prequel. Shadow Inc. was a company started by Gerard Niamira and Krista Davis, both of whom worked for Hillary Clinton's failed 2016 presidential campaign.
The company, which was founded by former Hillary Clinton staffers, was paid $60,000 to improve the reporting of caucus results.
Nothing suspicious about that at all. In the aftermath of the Iowa debacle, the app was looked at by several professional programmers, and they determined that the app seemed amateurish. And I accept that this is possible. Perhaps the app was simply poorly designed, but perhaps it was designed very well, but it was not designed just to tabulate votes and report them, but perhaps it was designed to manipulate them. Shadow Inc. was financed by a Silicon Valley billionaire named Reid Hoffman. Reid Hoffman previously financed something called Project Birmingham. Project Birmingham was developed, and I'm not joking, it was developed specifically for election manipulation. It was developed in order to create the illusion that Judge Roy Moore's political campaign was supported by the Russians. According to the Washington Post, Project Birmingham got its funding from internet billionaire Reid Hoffman, who emerged as a leading underwriter of Democrat causes after the 2016 election. In Alabama, Project Birmingham introduced fake evidence that automated Russian accounts called bots were supporting Moore in the race. As I said, Project Birmingham tried to create the illusion that Judge Roy Moore's political campaign was supported by Russians. This is clearly an attempt to manipulate an election through unethical and possibly illegal election interference. It was a scam. It was a con. And it was financed, as I said, by this guy Reid Hoffman, the same guy who financed the Shadow Inc. voting software that, quote, malfunctioned earlier this year during the Democrat Iowa caucus. So maybe, just maybe, this software was a failed attempt at vote manipulation. Now, Biden didn't win Iowa. Pete Buttigieg won. Interestingly, Tara McGowan, owner of Shadow Inc., is married to one of Pete Buttigieg's senior staffers. Coincidence? Maybe.
It was launched last year by a Democratic nonprofit called Acronym. Its CEO is married to a senior advisor of Pete Buttigieg, which the campaign has acknowledged.
So, all right, so maybe the DNC commissioned a number of programs to rig the primaries and caucuses. And certainly some of the programs would have failed, but some of these programs might have succeeded. And some of the failed programs could also have been tweaked and fixed so that they worked flawlessly. And after this trial run, then they would have known exactly how to rig the general election. And testing during the primaries would have been more or less safe because there wouldn't have been any danger of being investigated. The Democrats would have known that no election rigging within their own party would have raised suspicion among conservatives. Conservatives wouldn't care. So if they messed up in a way that could have gotten them caught, there would be little risk of anyone taking up the case or even noticing it. But after the primary tests were run, I don't think they would have just chosen the best technique, scaled it up, and implemented it widely for the general election against Trump. I think the Democrats are smarter than that. I think they would have used a different strategy. I think the Democrats would have used every technique that worked in the primary all at the same time. Several voter fraud methods that proved effective, would have been employed by the Democrats in every county they wanted to cheat in. Maybe one technique for a small county, but maybe 6 in a larger county, maybe 3 here, maybe 3 others there. Some methods would have been more effective in some states, other methods would have worked better elsewhere. If you want to rig an election and you use only one technique, if that technique is discovered, then the entire plot unravels. However, if several techniques are used, then if investigators uncover one technique, it only amounts to a small percentage of votes, too small to flip the election. It wouldn't actually be enough evidence of voter fraud to delegitimize the entire election. And if this is the case, then all fraud techniques must be discovered. And that is a very difficult thing to do. Tucker Carlson has even said that although he thinks voter fraud did occur, he doesn't think enough voter fraud occurred to flip the election. And maybe he's right if you consider only one voter fraud technique. But if a variety of techniques were used, each tiny manipulation of the votes added up could well have flipped this election. Now, if what I'm saying is true, then there is a possibility that the trial runs, the fraud used in the Democrat primaries, could lead investigators in the right direction to detect the type of fraud used in the general election. And the arbitrators of this fraud would have been less careful during the primaries, and they'd have been less experienced. They may have been sloppier. And so there may be more evidence left behind from the primaries than from the general. And as I said before, if we can figure out how they stole the primary, we can figure out how they stole the general. And so both should be investigated. But here's the real problem. We don't have enough investigators. Trump's legal team is good, but if my theory is correct, there just aren't enough of them to investigate every county in which fraud took place or to investigate every type of rigging technique that was used. More importantly, I don't think our investigators are experienced enough to detect all the techniques that might have been employed. I have great respect for Trump's legal team tackling this, and I can only assume that they brought in some brilliant people who are very knowledgeable about election fraud. But I highly doubt that they're all so knowledgeable about the various fraud techniques that they're going to be able to identify them all if my theory is correct. Given how little time investigators have to work on this, it's possible that some tiny, seemingly insignificant instances of fraud might get overlooked, but it may just be these tiny instances that, all added up, amount to a stolen election. What we really need is the FBI and the DOJ to get on this. We need the full force of the federal government looking into the possibility of election fraud. I wrote this piece 2 days ago, and then just yesterday, Trump came out with precisely the same message.
Where is the DOJ and the FBI in all of this, Mr. President? You have laid out some serious charges here. Shouldn't this be something that the FBI is investigating? Are they?
Missing in
Is the
action.
DOJ investigating?
Missing in action. Can't tell you where they are. I ask, are they looking at it? Everyone says yes, they're looking at it. It's inconceivable. You would think if you're in the FBI or Department of Justice, this is the biggest thing you could be looking at. Where are they? I've not seen anything. I mean, they just keep moving along, and they go on to the next president.
It's as if these people don't care whether or not our election was stolen. But I do care, and I think everybody watching this video cares as well. Sadly, without the FBI and without the DOJ on board, I think that the only way we might discover the truth is if somebody comes forward who was involved with this fraud and provides evidence and witness testimony to bring this entire crime ring down. And if you think this is something Democrats are simply incapable of doing, remember that in 2016, they corruptly engineered the Democrat primary against Bernie Sanders in order to promote Hillary Clinton as the Democrat nominee.
We learned today from former Democratic National Committee Chairwoman Donna Brazile that the Clinton campaign, in her view, did rig the presidential nominating process by entering into an agreement to control day-to-day operations at the DNC. The Clinton campaign controlling the party's staffing, strategy, finances, communications, and that agreement was entered into in August 2015, a year before she defeated Senator Bernie Sanders. This must shock you.
Look, this is a real problem.
Very quickly, Senator, do you agree with the notion that it was rigged?
Yes.
If they did it to Bernie in 2016, I think they'd be more than happy to do it to Trump in 2020. I'm going to be dropping a ton of videos in the next few days, each one dealing with various red flags that indicate that the election was stolen this year. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell to make sure that you hear about all of them. I fear that I'm one of the few people left trying to save our democracy here, and I'd like you all to stay informed about every irregularity and statistical anomaly that I've found, and there are some astonishing things that I'll be reporting. For instance, one truly amazing statistic that I reported just recently is that, as we all know, most conservatives believe that it's likely that the election was stolen. But what's even crazier is that 30% of Democrats also think the election was stolen. To me, that is just mind-blowing. 30% of Democrats in America. That's crazy. So anyway, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell. I'll inform you of all of these things in the upcoming days. Well, that's it for me. And remember, it's not that our liberal friends are ignorant. It's just that they'll do anything to hold on to power. Good night.
We're at war with the most dangerous enemy that has ever faced mankind in his long climb from the swamp to the stars. And it's been said if we lose that war, and in so doing lose this way of freedom of ours, history will record with the greatest astonishment that those who had the most to lose did the least to prevent its happening.